Good morning, church. We are actually going to start with a song this morning. I know you've probably been listening to music and to songs all week, but it's more than just about the song itself, isn't it? It's about us coming together in worship and just opening our hearts to God. We talked a few weeks ago how about in worship, even we come into the very presence of God. And so I just invite you to join us. I don't know what it's going to look like for you if you're home alone, if you're with your family, if you feel comfortable singing where you're at. Please do. If not, I still encourage you to open your hearts just to the presence of God this morning as we do this. We're going to sing Great Are You, Lord. You give life. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope. You restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath. It's your breath. are you, great are you, yes, Lord Jesus, we come together to worship you, to open our hearts to you, God. We want to grow in you, we want to know you more, Lord. Even in these times when we may have a lot of time on our own, we know that we are never alone, that you never leave us or forsake us, that we can trust, that we can rest, that we can find contentedness in you, Lord. So thank you, Jesus, for this time. Thank you that we can meet virtually and be together and worship to you. Amen. Now we're going to jump straight into our Bible passage. I have been and will continue to communicate primarily through email at these times. So if you're not on our local church email list and you want to be, just let me know. I want to make sure we're connecting with you, that you're not being missed or missing out on what's going on with us at Saddleback. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that stuff now, though. I just want to jump straight into our passage this morning. And that is Philippians chapter 4 still. So find a Bible. There's some online right there if you're in the live experience. And as you turn there, Philippians 4, the second half, again, this pre-scheduled passage has some very appropriate words for this time in history. Right, last week, the first half of Philippians 4 was on not being anxious, but keeping our minds tuned in to what is right and true and good. And then it also talked about rejoicing in the Lord, that finding that peace and joy in Him. So appropriate. And now this week, starting from verse 10, Philippians 4, verse 10, I want to hit two thoughts. But the first one is, again, this quick devotional thought that is so appropriate for right now. Paul writes, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. Whether I am in need or whether I have enough, I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength. So fitting for our situation today. Learning the secret to be content, whether I'm in need or have plenty. Right? Whether the grocery stores have stocked shelves or my pantry is empty. Whether I have toilet paper or whatever the alternative is going to be possibly in a few days. Right? Whatever the circumstances. And he ends this thought, this paragraph, with this verse that people like to quote. I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. But this is what it's actually about. That I can handle, I can manage, I can make it through anything. Right? I can survive COVID-19 panic and isolation because of Him. I can be at peace and rest and worship God, whether life's a beach, like I thought it would be in California this past week, or if I'm stuck in my house in a never-ending nakusp winter like it actually has been. Right? I've learned the secret, he says. And that secret is being in Him. Being in Him is what gives me the strength. Just like joy from a few weeks ago. It's when I'm actually in Him, in His presence, that I find this sense of peace, this sense of contentedness. And like joy, it may not be always easy to hold on to when I get back into my physical life, when my boots are back on the ground and I'm walking it out. Right? But in His presence, and the more I find that contentedness, it's in Him. And so the more I go back to Him, go back to in His presence, the more I find that peace and that sense of contentedness. Did you hear that? So take time in this time. Spend time in Him, finding that place of peace and contentedness of spirit in Him. So that's the devotional style from the first paragraph here. And if you're new to church, maybe that's all you need right now. The second part, as we move to the next paragraph, is more of a regular teaching sermon. Right? This week we're doing virtual church. So I want to do some teaching from this passage, maybe a bit more like we're used to. And in that I'm going to focus on a couple of phrases as the passage goes on. So here it is, starting at verse 14 now, I believe. It says, "Yet it was good of you to share in my troubles." And a quick interrupt here, actually, before we get carrying on. Right in front of me here, I can see it from here, there's tables with some basic goods, supplies, some money, some stuff that people from Saddleback Church have donated to share in people's troubles. Right? And that's awesome. Keep it up. Keep bringing it in. It is so good that you're looking to share in people's troubles. So, sorry, quick interrupt there for that. Back to it here. He says, "In the early days, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, except you only. Not that I desire your gifts. What I desire is that more be credited to your account. I have received full payment and more than enough. I am amply supplied now that I have received the gifts you sent. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God." This is our passage, and right now I know there might be someone tuning in online who hasn't been to church in years. He doesn't know me, doesn't know what we normally talk about at church, and I know right now someone's tuning in online saying, "Aha, I knew it! It's all about the money. The church just wants your money." Some time ago, I was in Caltire, just up the street here. I was getting a quote from Andrew, the manager. I know him fairly well, great guy. And there was another customer in there with us, and I can't remember if it was myself or the other guy. We were kind of ribbing Andrew a bit, bugging him about the high price of the quote. And then this other customer who I don't know, he said something like, "Nah, the only people who are just after your money are the government and the church." And Andrew couldn't help himself. He just gets this big grin, starts chuckling. He says, "Oh, I don't know. What do you think, Tony?" And I thought it was hilarious too. I just started smiling and I was just like, "Oh yeah, it's all about the money, just raking it in." And I think the guy kind of realized at that point I was connected with the church somehow, and he looked a little embarrassed and felt kind of sheepish. But I thought it was hilarious, but I do get it at the same time. I get that perception, right? And because it's right in some cases. There are too many bad examples. There's been too many bad experiences, ministries taking advantage. There's been the Jimmy Bakkers and the Jimmy Swaggarts lying, getting rich off of people's gifts. And so I get it. And I feel it. I feel the awkwardness of even approaching this subject. And yet this is a passage we find ourselves in, and I do want to teach from it this morning. And so now we do get to talk about giving and money, and even specifically giving to the church or the work of God that's around us. I thought it was kind of ironic, actually, that my very first videoed online sermon is about giving and money, because it's not something I generally like to talk about. Actually, I think this is the first time, probably in the 4.5 years I've been here speaking, that I'm talking on this. Because it is awkward. But I thought about it. I thought, that's actually my bad. That's on me, because who does talk about it is Jesus. Jesus actually talks about money and giving quite a bit. Talks about our use, our attitudes towards. Talks about watching out for greed, for self-sufficiency, our focus. He talked and he pinpointed towards money quite a bit in his teaching. I heard Kyle Edelman put it like this: Jesus talked a lot about money because he understood that money is God's chief competition. Think about that for a minute. Right? People look to money to do for them or to be for them what God should be in their lives. Money becomes that place where we put our security. We start to look forward to money. We put our hope in money, what it can do for us. And so Jesus put it, you can't serve two masters. You can't serve both God and money. You just can't. And it's not that we don't want to. It's not that we don't try to. Most of us actually probably do try to. But it just doesn't work. You can't. Our heart goes one way or the other. We're serving and living for, making decisions based on one, on money, or the other. God, they can't both be chief. They can't both be priority. And so the Bible does have a lot to say about our finances, about what we do with money. And it's not just give 10% to the church and all will be fine. You'll be great. No, the Bible teaches about wisdom. It teaches about priorities. It teaches about trust. It speaks to where our hearts are, what's important, where our focus is, our attitudes. And our attitude towards money, how it can really be a gauge of where our heart is at. And that's why Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will go as well. It's a gauge. So this morning I do want to talk about money, because I don't want your heart to be in the wrong place. I don't want you to find yourself unknowingly serving a different master. And so as awkward as it is for me, and I'm going to even talk about giving to the church this morning, because my hope is that each one of us will do a deep dive and question ourselves and ask, which master am I serving? I'm going to focus on two simple thoughts in this, each coming from a phrase from the passage we read. And then I'm going to connect those to living examples from the life of Jesus. So that the two thoughts this morning is that giving to Jesus is worship, and giving to Jesus is worth it. Giving is worship, and giving is worth it. So first, giving to God, often by way of the church, through the church, is worship. Verse 18 in our passage said, "The gifts you sent are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God." Well, what does that mean, a fragrant offering? Have you ever used incense? Ever burnt that? Had one roommate in college who loved to burn incense. But we lived in these tiny little college dorm rooms, and the rest of us that shared a room with him, especially once we caught the after scent of it in all of our clothing from our closets, we quickly booted that out the door. No incense in here, buddy. But you smelled that, right? That's what this is, the fragrance. But then it ties it to this acceptable sacrifice. And then that's the thought from the Old Testament worship, right? The meat was sacrificed as an act of worship. And what they did is they added that incense. They added that fragrance. So as the smoke from this sacrifice went up, it represented worship unto God, a fragrance burned just for God. This was part of their worship. It was an offering of praise and honor and just glory and worship to God. And so what this verse is saying is these gifts you sent, right? The finances you gave to the church of the time, they are worship. They're a way of worshiping that was pleasing and acceptable to God. That's what Paul's saying here. So that's the phrase, giving is worship. And now the tie-in story is from Mark chapter 12. There's this time when this widow came and put 2 coins into the offering. It says here, Jesus watched the crowd putting their money into the offering. Rich people threw in large amounts. And I've got to pause. I want you to picture the context here. All right, so Jesus is watching. There's this place where the offerings were put in. We have this offering box here at the church. It's a little bit like that, except this was a large bowl made out of copper or some kind of metal. So that coins, right, the amount of coins, the size of your offering would echo and reverberate. Everyone in the temple would hear how large your offering was. That was the point here. So Jesus, sitting here watching people put it in, that was how this was designed to be. They wanted to be noticed. They wanted to make a show out of it. And really, it's kind of sad. And even sadder is how I know I've seen churches do really the same thing today. Right? Some churches make a big show. Let's get as much money in as we can by making it a thing. And it is sad, and I'm sure that this hurts the heart of God, because that's not what it's supposed to be about. But that was what was happening here in this episode in Jesus' life. The clang and the echo of offerings being put in. And then comes this poor widow. And it says she came with her 2 little pennies. Pennies are so unvaluable, so worthless, that we've stopped producing them. We've stopped charging them in our day and time. Right? You go to pay cash somewhere, and they round it to the nearest nickel. We just don't even take account of pennies anymore. So she comes with her 2 pennies, and Jesus says she put in more than anyone. She gave more with her 2 pennies. That's a significant statement. See, Jesus saying this about such a small, insignificant amount, a couple of pennies. Jesus saying this shouts out that giving to God, giving to the church, is clearly not about the money at all. If giving 2 cents can gain the applause of heaven, if it can gain the praise of Jesus, then it's not actually about the money at all. This 2 cents would make 0 difference to the bottom line of that temple or the priests or whoever it was. Right? If the pastor was to come, I don't touch the money actually, but if the pastor or the treasurer was to come and take the offering from the week and go to buy supplies, the church is out of toner for the printer, or more likely we're out of hand soap and sanitizer. If that 2 cents wasn't in the offering, guess what? Big deal. Doesn't matter, right? He'll take 2 cents out of the little cup that says take a penny, leave a penny. That's how worthless they are. If he doesn't have it, that cashier won't even care. Just wave it off. I don't need your pennies. So this passage tells us that giving, it's not about the money itself. It's not about the size or the value of this little chunk of metal or this piece of paper. It's about the heart. It's about what it represents. It's about honoring and submitting and relying on God. It's about trusting Him first as the one who cares. Right? That there are pointers throughout the Bible that even financial, money offerings, these gifts to God, to the church or the temple back then, that how they were an act of worship because they involved trust and obedience to a good, loving God. It's about worshiping God as God and not money as God. And so this widow's offering was a fragrant offering, as Paul puts it. It was her giving was worship to God. Now, have you ever thought about it in this story that Jesus doesn't stop the widow? I mean, isn't that what we would have done? What you or I? Right? No, stop. Oh, you poor dear. You don't have to give, really. Really, you don't need to do that. You know, we should be giving to you. You don't need to do that. But Jesus doesn't stop her. Because Jesus knows it's not actually about the money, large or small. And He knows that this kind of worship, this act of trust is so good, it's so much more valuable, and it brings her to a deeper connection, a deeper relationship with God, that He allows her to take this step. You know, and I thought maybe that's what God's doing in your life right now. You know, He's watching you even in these crazy, hard times. Right? The economy is tanking right now. And maybe you're not down to your last 2 pennies. But many have lost thousands in retirement savings and pensions. Many have lost their jobs, their source of income, maybe this very week. And God, I picture Jesus being like Aladdin right now. Not like the genie. That's how sometimes we like to picture Him, right? God, just grant me my wishes. Not like that, but like Aladdin. You know that scene where Aladdin is on the carpet just below Jasmine's balcony? And Jasmine's confused, and Aladdin just puts his hand out and says, "Do you trust me?" Maybe that's God right now. Do you trust me? enough to continue worshiping me, even in this area of giving, when things go sideways? Do you trust me? And when, like Jasmine, when you say yes, it might be a wild ride. It might not feel very safe at first, but it'll be the most beautiful ride you've ever been on. I want to be like Jasmine. I want to be like that widow. I want to earn the accolades of Jesus. I want to be his object lesson for other people. I want to give with a heart of worship and trust and place my priority and my hope and my desire on him, on his kingdom, on his priorities. And I want to give God the worship that he is due, even through this area of giving, because it's not about the money itself, but it's about my heart before him. And giving becomes one way that I can worship. Well, the second thought from Paul's paragraph here that I want to highlight is that giving to Jesus is worth it. It was worship. Not only is it worship to sacrifice, but it's worth it to sacrifice. Verse 17 and 18 said, "Not that I desire your gifts. What I desire is that more be credited to your account." So Paul uses this banking, this investment language, right? That this will be credited to your account. You'll get some credit for this. It'll become worth it to you in some account somewhere. It's an investment for you. Now, hear me out here. I want to be straight with this. Bringing financial gifts, offerings to the church, to God, in whatever format, bringing these is not a financial investment plan. I'm not saying that God will guaranteed absolutely reward you financially for giving, right? Because sometimes we hear that. That's what those TV evangelists might tell you that I mentioned, right? We hear this idea, if I give this much to God, God will bless it 10 times and I'll get this much back, right? That's the prosperity gospel. That's one term for that. And any form of this kind of thinking, well, you know what? Well, then money is still your focus. Money is still your God. Prosperity is your God, if that's the way you're thinking. It's not that kind of credit that Paul's talking about. It's not this return on investment in finances. In fact, he strongly warns against this. I was just this week recently reading in 1 Timothy chapter 6. And there Paul talks about false teachers who think that godliness, following God, is a means to financial gain. Right? Financial return, that kind of credit is not the point here at all. That's a false teaching. Paul says very clearly. Yet what he does say is that there's some kind of credit. There's something given to you in your account of some sort. It becomes worth it in some way or another when we give. And that's because God does see. God does bless. Jesus says we're storing up treasures in heaven is one way. But even here on earth, God does see, he does bless. And what I do know is that the Hebrew thought around prosperity, the Hebrew concept of prosperity, was not financial at all. But it was a spirit and a soul well-being. And this is, I believe, where it becomes worth it for us. Even in this life, even on earth, in the short term, it becomes worth it to give because it brings a prosperity of soul. It makes us rich in spirit. I remember earlier on in our life as a family, we had young children. Kirsten was staying home to take care of them. I didn't have exactly the most high-paying job at the time, so things were tight. Things were tight. I walked to work so that we could get by with one vehicle, but even that vehicle was 15, maybe 20 years old. And I can remember numerous times walking home from work. And as I was walking, I would kind of admire some of the shiny new vehicles. And then admiring would turn into, I wish I could have that. I wish we could have a better vehicle. I wish we could have that. You know how that goes, right? And so that's the frame of mind I'd be in sometimes when I was walking home. And then it hit me one of these times. It suddenly dawned on me, it clued in. You know, we could do that. Because the amount that we gave to God at that time, that we gave to the church, was, I think, very close, probably bang on what a lease on a new vehicle, a cheaper new vehicle, but what a lease would be. So I could walk that day and go and get a lease, and I could have a shiny new vehicle. But I was choosing not to. I was choosing something more important, something more worth it. I was choosing to honor Jesus with my money, to take part in his kingdom. And that realization that day changed everything for me. Suddenly it wasn't this beaten down sense of lacking. Suddenly, no matter how tight things were, regardless of how many times my muffler fell off and I had to get that shiny, weird tape and get underneath there and heat tape it together, no matter how many times, I was choosing something that was worth so much more than these fleeting things. I was honoring God. I was obeying God. And even with my somewhat limited finances, I was putting into his kingdom. And it was worth it. And what came of that was this joy of obedience. It's weird, really. Just this contentedness and joy of obedience. This soul blessing and realizing that giving to God was worth it. I want to tie in the second story from the life of Jesus into this point as well now. This time it's from Mark chapter 14. This is when a woman brought a gift to Jesus as well. Many know the story. Verse 3 it says, she brought some very expensive perfume. And in verse 5 it says this perfume was actually worth more than a year's wages. Now that is extravagant. Right? Put that into our context. Obviously it wouldn't be the same, but in our context, a year's wages. Current minimum wage is $13.85. So 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, that's just short of $29,000. Right? That's minimum wage for full-time work. So this perfume was worth more than a year's wages. Can you imagine popping the cork on that sucker? I mean, I get antsy if a bottle of wine costs more than $12. $30,000 jar of perfume poured out. Wow. It says she broke the jar and poured it out. She broke it. What that means to me is she didn't hold anything back. Right? Aren't you tempted sometimes maybe to hold back a little bit? Right? I know I am. I want to give to Jesus. I want to give for his glory, his kingdom. I've decided in my heart maybe what I should give. That's biblical to do that. And yet when it comes to the time, you know what? I don't break the jar. I carefully pour it out. So that if it starts feeling like a little too much, a little too extravagant, I can stop. I can hold back a bit. Or maybe I can make it look like I've poured it all out, but really I know there's a few drops left in there for myself. Are you ever tempted to do that? That's not what she does here. She brings this gift, this extravagant gift, and she brings it all. She breaks the jar, holds nothing back. And we see in this story that, again, it was so worth it for her. I see, first of all, not only the soul health and the cleansing, right? She was weeping and praying at Jesus' feet. She was defended and sheltered by Jesus. Right? The soul cleansing, that prosperity that we talked about, soul well-being first. But also the legacy. Right? Jesus says here that wherever he's talked about, she'll be talked about. Wherever his story is told, her story will be told. That's amazing. You cannot buy that kind of legacy. Right? Not with $30,000. Her story, her testimony, her faith in God, her legacy spoke not just to the next generation, but 2,000 years later, it's still speaking. This humble yet extravagant gift was so worth it. And then in this story, I see another part of how giving to God is worth it. And that is, it's because he is worth it. It says in verse 4 that some objected to this gift. Now in Matthew's gospel, it specifies some of the disciples objected. John's gospel, it pinpoints Judas as one of the ones who was indignant at this gift, it says. They say, why this waste? And I want you to think about that for a moment. Why this waste? What are they actually saying? See, they say this perfume is good enough for someone because they said it could be sold. Someone rich would buy it. So it's good for maybe Pilate's wife or the Caesar. But to pour it out on Jesus, what a waste. Jesus is sitting right there. He can hear you. All right, they're saying, yes, Jesus, you are Lord, you are Master, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of God, but this is wasted on you. You're not worth this kind of extravagance. And you know, I think maybe in some ways I've said that sometimes. I know I've questioned even the value of church as we do it. Right? It takes so much money for a building and to heat this place and sound equipment and salary, right? I get paid to lead worship and to teach people the Bible. Right? So much money, it could be used for the poor. And I know that times I've expressed this, Kirsten has reminded me, look in the Old Testament. Right? The extravagance that they put on for God. The temples with gold and silver and all things valuable, right? The priests, the prayers. And this was done not to appease an angry God like other nations might have done, but it was done because he's worth it. Because he is good. His love endures forever. And if anyone is worth this extravagance, it's him. And so if this place exists just to worship and honor him, it's worth it. If it exists and makes it possible for someone to come and honor and meet with God, it's worth it. Right? It's kind of similar to that first worship theme. It's giving is worship, and giving is worth it because he is worth it. And that's what this woman was doing in this story. She's saying, yes, Jesus, you are worth it. You are worth the most extravagance. And so, am I being like her in my heart? Or like Jesus, or like Judas? Saying, you're really not worth it, Jesus. To have a building here. To have a place where you can be worshipped in nakusp. Right? And maybe that's a question. It's a question I've struggled with. Maybe it's a question that you've struggled with. Others have. Is it worth it to give to the church? And I look at this woman, and I look at Judas, and I look at their hearts, their lives, their legacy, and I say, giving is worth it not only for what it does in my soul, but it's also worth it just because you are worth it, Jesus. So back to the question there in Kaltire. Does the church just want your money? Well, this church, like anything or anyone, it does need and use finances to exist, to do what we do. And while what we do might not be perfect, it is done with a heart of honoring God. So money is useful for that. But it's not about the money. The church will go on with or without your 2 cents. Not meaning to be rude. See, it's not as much for the church's benefit that you give, or that God asks you to give, as it is for your benefit. God knows that where your treasure is, there your heart will also go. And so I give because it is worship. I give because it is worth it. I give because he is worth it. I give because I want to honor God to the best of my ability with my whole heart. And so this morning, for some of you who have also been giving faithfully for many years, I just want to bless you in that. I want to affirm you in that it is worship and it is worth it. That Jesus is watching like that widow in the temple. Jesus sees and he applauds what you've been doing. And maybe a challenge that he continues to watch to see what you will continue to do. In a crunch time, he says, do you still trust me? And I really hope that doesn't sound manipulative, like I'm trying to get you to give even in this hard time. It's not about the money. What it's about is that there's nothing in your heart between you and God. For some, if maybe this is a new area for you, or maybe an area that you've just always struggled in over the years, for whatever reason. Again, I don't want to harp on that. And again, in so many ways, it feels so inappropriate to even talk about it, but I'm just teaching the Bible. And so I just want to encourage you, those same words. Giving to God is worship. It's part of our worship to Him. It expresses that He is worth it. And the results of it are worth it in your own spiritual walk. And so finally, back to Jesus' question. Who's your master? Who are you worshiping? What is shown to be of worth of your finances? My answer is God, and I pray that yours is as well. Well, thank you, God, for the challenge of your word as well as the assurance of your word. Thank you that we can trust you, and we can rely on you, and we can rest in you. God, and I pray that you give us the strength, like this passage said, that you give us the strength to be not only content, but also to continue to give to you, no matter what the circumstances. And back to that devotional thought, God, thank you that it's in you that I can find that sense of contentedness and that sense of peace. And I pray for each one that's with us this morning or whenever they're watching this, that you will do that for them. Draw them into your presence so that they can know your peace and the contentedness that comes from being in you. Pray this by the power of the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, thank you. It's been cool getting to be together like this morning and to spend church with you on this Sunday morning. If you've been here live, it's a neat experience for you, I hope. And we're going to continue on with this. We're going to aim for doing this on Sunday mornings until we can actually meet again in person. No idea what this is going to look like in the coming weeks and months. And so we just want to do our best to encourage, to grow in God, to challenge each other's faith as well as lift it up. And so again, in this on your screen there's a request prayer button. You can use that now to chat and start to initiate prayer requests there. You can always contact myself. You can always contact us at the church. We just want to continue being the church, even if we cannot meet in person for a church service. So bless you. Thank you for being here, and just have a wonderful week. Soon we will be talking about if we can meet even more often virtually like this, and what that's going to look like. So stay tuned. Get on the email list if you're not on it. God bless you this day. Enjoy it with your family and with your Father.